All right, good morning. Thank you for being here. I thought about having everybody stand, but I hate when people do that to me, so I'm not going to do that. But if I did have you stand, that would remind you that you're in a body, right? And that touch is related to personal presence, which is what you've done here. And where certain people actually have more skill at personally presenting themselves than others, some of us still kind of even interact in person as if we were still on a Zoom call. Some people, personal presence in the sense of touch, feel, that interpersonal dynamic is really what we're going to talk about. I kind of envision this as like one of those like crump battles, you know, where you all kind of like, I provoke you all and then you all, you know, get into it. Herbie Hancock, who is a jazz pianist, was approached once by a student and said, how do I develop that amazing feel on the keyboard, that amazing touch? And he said, become a better person. Now, what I think he meant was become more whole, become more who you are. Miles Davis said it takes a long time to learn how to play like yourself, to be you. Now, I found two people who, even though they got those long pages of stuff, you know, and it's impressive. The most impressive thing that I found between the two of y'all is that you all are actual human beings. And you have used your own personal feel for how to do your work. Carter G. Woodson, who is the founder, known as the founder of Black history, was an amazing scholar and remained in the classroom for his entire life. A lot of times, you know, fancy people start removing themselves from people later in life. But these two fancy people have not. And so I want to ask, y'all have your mics and they're on? Yeah? Apparently they don't work if they're off. So let me ask you this, to kick things off. Who are you, briefly? Not academically, but personally. And what was your first impression of that other person?
Ladies first.
Ladies.
Okay. Can y'all hear okay? Y'all hear that? Okay. I'd have to get my preacher voice on. Who am I? That's a question, right? I will tell you, it took me a long time to figure out who I was. Is that anybody in the room? Yeah. I grew up in a space where people expected me to be a certain way. Is that anybody? Okay. Anybody in the back? Okay, all right. So who am I? I am a lover of people. I genuinely love people.
Even mean people?
Let me say what I do about mean people. We didn't say that. So the reason why I say I'm a lover of people is because when you have been forgiven much, you learn how to forgive other people. Is that true of some of y'all still struggling with forgiveness? We'll talk later. So I am a lover of people, and I know who I am, and I know what my boundaries are. I think Ben and I were talking a little bit earlier. There are certain things I just will not do. And I mean that, right? That's not to make other people uncomfortable, but I have to be true to who I am. No matter what space I walk into, I'm the thermostat. I set the temperature for myself. So if I walk into hell, I'm not gonna become hell. I'm gonna stay peace. Is that?
Yeah.
Because I want my hair and my teeth at the end of the day. Right? Y'all ever see people start losing their hair? Teeth get loose? Oh, well, I'm not talking about. Woo! I should have watched what I said. So I just, oh, Ben.
It's all downhill from here.
I want to live as authentically as I can. Mm-hmm. And I used to change, you know, all the time, code switching. We don't have that much time. But I used to change a lot, right? I don't do that. I just who I am. I'm just who I am.
But it takes a while to get there.
Oh yeah, it took me a while. Yeah. And sometimes still people push you, right? They still push you. but I try to be as authentic as I can in all the spaces that I am, so I don't have to try to remember who I am.
So what was your first impression of this white brother?
Oh, we met on Zoom, y'all. I keep touching him because Ben's kind of buff, y'all. I'm married, he's married, don't play. But yeah, he was, to read who you are like on paper. This man has done so much, but he was just so warm, welcoming, right? Even over Zoom, y'all, it's hard to kind of identify with folks, but he was leaning in, he was talking, he was laughing. We love music. And so I felt really comfortable with you. It wasn't, I didn't have to be anything. I just talked.
Even though I don't have hair?
You can buy it these days. So
I got you.
you
I
can buy
got you.
it these days.
So Ben, who are you?
Well, who am I? I'm obviously the guy who didn't follow the same path as Karen, as she's already identified, because I've done something wrong, but that's okay. Chris, can you turn this mic up just a teeny bit, if you know how?
Yeah, it is a little.
So I'm a musician. I'm an artist. I'm a father. My daughter's here today. She's off school, and she's hating the fact that I'm even pointing to her, but she's in the second row if you want to come talk to a 15-year-old and learn what that was like, is like these days. Yeah, I'm a clinician. I'm an advocate. I'm a lot of things, but I actually think that when most people ask you, who are you, we always default to our jobs. Oh, I'm a business guy, I'm a banker, or I'm a whatever. And I just think that that's so junior varsity. It's just so middle school, no offense. It's a place that it's not meaningful. So when we first met, I have to say, we started talking about the things that we both were drawn to, which is music. And we immediately applied those principles for music. Can I switch this one?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Just not loud enough. Okay. We applied those principles of music to what we are passionate about. Now, we both are passionate about music, but we immediately started talking about how when you're in the music business, especially jazz, you have to improvise all the time. So when you're on a stage and your mic doesn't work, you got to take a breath and be okay with it and improvise and take Chris's mic.
Yeah.
When you're in a business meeting and someone looks at you and asks you the hardest question you've ever been asked and you have no idea the answer, you got to improvise a little bit, okay? The beauty of this is that it actually reminds us that we're human. And while we were, probably 10 miles away on Zoom and we're next to each other now, I was immediately drawn to Karen because of her authenticity and the fact that we could connect on a common cause of something that is so intimate like music. So I'll stop on that, Chris.
That's good. Oh,
Just gonna share.
Thank you.
Don't share.
so who taught you how to be a person? Who's like a role model in your life that began the process of becoming more present to yourself?
That's a good question.
Okay, my back was turned. What'd you say?
Who were some of your teachers growing up?
Oh,
They taught you how to be a person.
you should never give your mic away. Y'all see how he didn't want to give it to me?
I know.
All right. Teachers, let me think about this for a minute. I would say my first teacher was probably my grandmother. And the reason why I'd say that, my grandmother was an educator.
What's her name?
Ida Bell Anthony. She's no longer with us. But yes, she is, because she's in me.
That's right.
So she's here. And the reason why I liked Miss Ida was feisty, y'all. My grandma was feisty. She was about 5'4", so she was on the shorter side. She loved her roses. She loved, being an educator, but she was educating folks in Rome, Georgia, real rural, right? And people thought, as my grandma got older in age, she wasn't a professional anymore. They thought that, she wasn't important. I saw people overlook her, but she had this kind of silent confidence. She was a bad chick, y'all. Yeah. She was bad. I'm dating myself. What do I say now? She was. She had swag. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, I'm 54. I'm still working on it. But anyway, she was so knowledgeable, right? She knew things and she was intuitive. She was sexy, she was a sexy grandma. There's nothing wrong with that, y'all. I think I'm a sexy 54-year-old. Don't count us out, right? But she was a woman, so she was in tune to who she was. She was a wife, a mother, but she kind of let all of those things meld her. And then she loved her community. She loved her community, right? I saw her working in the community. She didn't get recognition. She wasn't on television, but she made sure her neighbors were fed. She would go through and help them with their yard work because she loved roses and growing flowers. And I just learned how to, even though I have all this stuff in me, all the time you don't have to put it on display. Sometimes you just walk into a room and who you are just speaks for itself.
How about you, Ben?
Well, I'm going to stick with the theme of grandmas because mine, I had two. Mine were extremely influential in me in different ways, and I'm going to talk about the one here in Chattanooga because I had another one that lived outside of La Follette. My grandmother here, her name is Lou Miller. She was a county commissioner after my grandfather passed away. She actually inherited a seat. It's an amazing story, and I don't think we would do that these days. But she taught me how to be brash, to be brave, to be courageous, to not really care too much about the world thinks of you because you have to do what's right. And I'll never forget this. I don't know how many of you listen to talk radio still. Talk radio used to be a pretty big thing. It's okay. You don't have to hide your hand.
She's like,
but 25, 30 years ago, talk radio was where you got all your local news, your politics. You learned who was running for what. It was pretty hopping. I'll never forget. We're sitting in her kitchen, and she had just made me this amazing breakfast. I'm sitting there listening to her talk to me about politics in general, and she's listening to the radio. And something comes on the radio that totally irks her. Like, she cannot believe that someone just said that. So she was like, just give me a second. And she goes in the other room. I don't know where she's going. She gets on her phone, and she calls into the radio station. So the next thing I know, I'm sitting there eating my breakfast, and I hear my grandmother on the radio, appropriately or inappropriately, referring to the county mayor as an asshole.
oh, well,
Now, this is 25 years ago, so you have to do your homework. And I remember just being so blown away by that. And it influences me to this day. Now, I don't get on the radio and call people names, but I think about how she felt it so deeply that in that moment, she had to take action. Mm-hmm. And how many times in our own lives have we felt something so deeply, but we sit there and it only leads to inaction? And I got to tell you, folks, I mean, if there's one thing that I'm probably most passionate about now, is doing what you have in the moment that you got.
that's right.
So from small things like being able to touch the person next to you and just shake their hand and greet and say, hi, my name is, to having them actually engage you in a meaningful way. I learned these things very early on from the press in the flesh, walking around doing campaigns when I was this big, putting signs in yard, all the way up to, engaging people now, 40 years later, in a room full of folks that are really trying to be creative. So, grandmas.
And it seems like we've steered away from developing our own personal sense of ourselves, right? I mean, I want to ask you, touch is such a fleeting kind of conversation, and I somehow want to get to how does touch and personal feel and engagement interact in areas of your professional work. I do want to say this, since you told the story about grandmothers. I'm not going to talk about my grandmother, but I was in the room in 1986 at the National Press Club and heard James Baldwin speak the year before he died. Wow. And Baldwin, with those big, beautiful eyes, and he would hold a cigarette like this, and he would call dudes baby. Baby, what you need to understand. I mean, it was just like, and all of that was not affect. It was an integration of his own personal acceptance of himself. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how you help someone to do that, but I know it has an impact on our work. It has an impact on our work. Otherwise, we just focus on efficiency and information. Yeah. So how grab something from what I just said.
Okay. I'll let Ben go.
All right, let's do an exercise, and hopefully this will demonstrate what Chris is saying. Take your phones out for a second. I know, If you don't have them, it's okay. You can do it in your head.
Right.
Unlock your phone and hand it to the person next to you.
Oh, look at that. Look.
Okay, now just pause before anybody gets in anybody's trouble. All right, give your phones back, lock them, put in your pocket. Give them back. Please give them back. Yes. Okay,
Oh my God.
let's talk about this moment for a second. I want you to go ahead and in real time process how you felt. Right? You may or may not, you may or may not have known the person to your left or right. You may or may not, know their name or even felt comfortable what was on your phone. Oh my gosh, what was the last thing I was looking at on my phone? But this is where touch comes into play in a different way because, embedded within that exercise that we just did is the notion of trust. And it's really hard to have any meaningful touch, however you want to define that, without trust. So going from something as simple as trusting someone with an intimate activity like your phone to it being in their presence, which is a gift unto itself. And do you feel like you can trust the person that you're sitting next to? Here's the thing that happens. And actually, let's do another exercise. I'm full of experiential this morning. Just take a moment, and I want you to pretend, go back to your phone. You don't need to pull it out. But just pretend it starts buzzing, okay? The person who calls you, who's calling you, is in a crisis. They're going through something big, they don't know how to handle it, and you're the person that they are calling to get help. How do you respond? Think about that for just a second. Do you know what to say? Do you know where to point them? Do you know what to do? Because I'm fundamentally convinced, my friends, that somewhere along the way in our journey of connection, we've taken the wrong path. And we've gone down this path where things are more superficial. The touch is more like, good to see you, versus tell me what's really going on. And that stuff has changed our society for the worse. And we can get into issues of lack of empathy, lack of connection, lack of social cohesion, whatever you want to call it, whatever fancy words you want to use. But it comes down to the fact that I think we've lost trust in each other. How do you build that? Well, we'll talk about that hopefully in a minute.
We gained a lot of distrust.
Extremely. Distrust,
Yeah.
mistrust, you name it. I mean, any of the words you want to use.
Touch is associated with violation,
Absolutely, absolutely.
with intrusion, getting in the way.
Yeah, please keep
Go
going.
ahead.
I'm going to speak now.
Yeah.
So, Ben and I were talking a little bit earlier, and I like to sit down but I'm gonna stand up for this. So you saw him when he asked you to change your phones, to pass them along. Ben, I saw some of the eyes. Y'all eyes got about that big. Y'all were like, what is he doing? And I was kind of glad I didn't have mine, so I wouldn't have to give it to Chris. But I trust Chris, you're okay. But for me, when Chris was talking about touch, because I do a lot of public speaking. I sing, I perform, preach, I do a lot of things. When I do that, I look at people. Have y'all noticed that people don't really look you in the eyes anymore? Did COVID mess up some huggers? I'm a hugger. Anybody else is a hugger? Y'all, I literally had to ball my fist up and put my hands down because I was so used to touching people. I met Cece, and I know Rosetta, but I met Cece. I touched her knee. I'm sorry, Cece. We were talking, right? And I was like, girl, I touched her. But Ben said something about you have to have trust in touch. You heard Chris talk about that, you can violate that trust as well, right? And for me, when I see people being disingenuous, right, they are only speaking to me to probably either get something, find out something. I work in politics, so I'm gonna tell you everything. Oh, I forgot to say my disclaimer. Everything I say for me, not representing Mayor Kelly. Can I say that? Before it goes on Twitter, Instagram, any of that stuff? Y'all good? Okay, I'm gonna be good.
You're good.
So for me, when I find out that people are not being, genuine, it bothers me. And I try to help them to bring it down a little bit, right? Have you all ever heard any people that kind of pressure talk? They just talk real fast. They got to get everything out. They're just trying to. So it's very transactional, like this, right? Talking to you, I'm talking to you, I'm trying to get something done, da 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 da. I try to slow all that down. Because, like Ben said, I want to get to know who you are. Now, that takes time, especially when we don't have time.
Stay right here.
Okay.
Do you think white people have more issues with what you're talking about?
See, really? Okay. let me say this. I think it is. I mean, I think it is a racial thing, right? And I'm not gonna say white people, black people, Asian people, whatever. But what I'm gonna say is, people who are not used to being genuine with folk have a problem with this. Whether you're white, black, whatever, right? But I do think white privilege does lean into this conversation. Can I say that? Absolutely. Y'all good? I love y'all. I did say it, didn't I? So being genuine with somebody, you have to respect who that person is. And I often say this, you can't honor one person while disrespecting another person. That's not honor. And if you say that you're a person who treats people equitably, you need to treat people equitably, right? And you cannot say you're in the business of equity and you are constantly treating people differently.
But the trick is you're going to have to hear from people who are feeling the impact of inequity.
Oh yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
So you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and hurt a little bit.
Oh yeah. You don't get out of this without wounds. I have people all the time either profiling me, talking to me like I'm in the room, not to mention your gender, right? I'm a woman. I'm a tall one. If you're tall, you stand out. Any tall women in the room? Any tall women that dress like power? Because I got my power shirt on today. Y'all see my power jacket? Boom, bam, boom, right? So when you walk with a certain authority, you are intimidated. You don't mean to be. It's just in you, right? And when you walk with a certain level of freedom, people who are bound don't like free people. They don't. You know why? Because it messes up their whole kind of concept, right? Because you can say what you need to say. I'm just not in the business of trying to hurt people while I'm talking to you. I try to educate you. And if I can't educate you, I gotta walk away to figure out how do I interact with you.
So if you engage in this project of becoming more of who you are, more of a person, what I'm hearing you say is that it's going to piss some people off.
Oh yeah, it's
They're going to feel anxious, and they're going to think to themselves, "Oh, who do you think you are with your jacket and your Coco Chanel glasses and all that kind of stuff? You know, I mean, you think you're better than me?" But it's interesting. I think we have that reaction because it challenges us to maybe consider the possibility of becoming who we are. Would you agree with that, Ben?
I would. I mean,
give him
yeah,
that.
I'm going to use this one. I'm going to turn it up.
Okay.
Can you turn it?
We're going to improvise here, and I'm going to keep messing with the levels. That's a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we started out today with who we were and that
I turned 'em up.
identification and understanding of ourselves. And unfortunately, I think the last couple of years, and you said this beautifully at the beginning, I think the last couple of years has been really hard on folks. I think it's made us look in the mirror a little bit differently. Not just our enterprises and our institutions, but really us. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. I mean, Zoom, we were joking about it earlier, but most people didn't really know how awkward they speak until they saw themselves for 8 hours a day on Zoom.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, because, you pretend like you're looking at other people, but you're not.
You're just
And you learn like, oh, this year is different than this year. And, I make this face, or, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I was making that face when they were talking about something really important. And so we had to redefine a little bit of our understanding of even who we were. And I will say this, and I've seen it from the good and the bad side. Some people have thrived and have come out of that just okay. Other people have not. And that it's the other people who have not, and going back to our issues of equity, that I worry a lot about. Because there are people who are still afraid to authentically engage coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, arguably, based on data, we're still technically in the pandemic. I have
Yeah.
to say that. My public health friends will kick me if I don't. But it has forced us again to reconcile all of these issues that have been happening for years that we have not addressed yet. So when was the last time you were face to face, maybe it was this room today, with somebody you haven't seen in a couple of years? How do the rules of engagement change? How does your level of authenticity change? How does your comfort level change? All of those things are on the table now. So I think, going back to Chris's question, I think this is a moment to rewrite our social contracts. And I think it's an opportunity to do so in a way that furthers the establishment of community and connection. If we go back in, there's been history. I read too much, and so there's been all these trends that we've seen over time of where we as a society have come together and then we drift apart. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can make it as like whimsical as even looking at like the rap game. I mean, the 80s and 90s it was all about groups, and now it's all about individuals. Mm. Okay, so we can play that game. But what I think it tells us is that now some of you are looking at each other. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. I think so. Thank you.
I'm not a rap connoisseur, but
No, that's
I think
okay.
you're right.
Thank you. I mean, Johnny Coltrane would back up Miles Davis, and his name wasn't ever on the album. Mm-hmm. It's just, okay.
Yeah.
So much to say. So my point is that this moment, right now, don't take this for granted. Leave this room having made a new connection, but also ask yourself, am I showing up the way I actually need to be showing up to not only establish my own true, authentic self, but to maybe help somebody else? If we did that right now, guys, I mean, Chattanooga's not a huge city. This room, you're the pebbles in the pond. You become the ripples. You go home and do it with your family, your friends. You do it with your coworkers. Think about how that changes our entire culture, our society. Maybe we'll get back to that place where it actually is healthier.
There you go.
Can you change the culture of your enterprise, your business, your group, if the people above you just aren't on board with that?
Chris, woo. I have to take a deep breath on that. I think that change for anybody, because we are in these fallible bodies, it's hard. Anybody struggle with change? Everybody should be shaking their heads. Oh, everybody, right? So, what I think Chris is talking about is being in a space where the people above you, who I'm thinking has authority over you, are you saying that? Okay, let me say that. So you don't see them changing at all. And because I'm in the DE&I world, and I think we toss those words around too much. Does anybody agree with that diversity, equity, and inclusionary work? That's some tough work, and I'm in it every day. I'm steeped in it. But when you don't see the change in an organization, and I can talk about a lot of things, but let me just talk about politics where I am. I work at the will of whoever is in the mayor's office. Does that make sense for y'all? If they don't like what I'm doing, guess who's not gonna be there the next day? Me, right? So when you have people who are over you and you see that they have a certain construct and they're not moving from that construct, what you have to do is to not be moved by them. Does that make sense to anybody? I said earlier, I had to learn this. Just because I'm in a space where people think a certain way, if it's race involved, if it's whatever involved, misogyny, whatever, gender. Right now I'm dealing with ageism. Any 50-year-olds in the room? Anybody over 40? Dang, y'all young. Okay, I'm dealing with ageism right now, right? And so what I have to do, and I said this earlier, I had to learn how to be who I was and not be affected by who was over me, who was a colleague, or who maybe, lower than me in something or whatever you want to call it. I just move, and I move in consistency. Now, I know that sounds easier said than done, and I know you're gonna take this from me, but I'm being honest about this. You have to learn how to be who you are no matter where you are. Mm-hmm. put that on a t-shirt and wear it. You have to. You know why? Because you will drive yourself crazy. And sometimes people, you will be the only example that people will see. Because if you can do it, they can do it. I just believe that even though it's difficult, and Chris knows me, I've taken some shots for this. You know, I've taken some shots from, black folks. I've taken some shots from white folks. I've taken a whole bunch of shots. But for me, I have to be who I am. I'm the best me that I can be. So if somebody above me has a certain construct, when they say something, I have to still say something to combat that. Does that? Totally. Are you hearing me? And you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, whether or not you have a job the next day. I'm gonna let that just hang in the air. Whether or not in your social interactions, they'll accept you the next day. I'm in all kind of organizations that I pay to be in. And I say some tough things in those rooms. And sometimes they don't speak to me the next day. And I'm okay with that. Because I know how to talk to myself. But you have to be willing to be true to who you are. Because if you don't, you're going to keep on changing, morphing, changing, until you don't even recognize who you are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's easier just to be you.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
So you can change the world through your own personal presence, at least at a beginning. So let's shift to Q&A. Who's got an uncomfortable question for these people? And you're going to have to walk up here to me. Who's got a question? Come on. Here comes it.
Is that a question?
Any questions?
She's got one. You can just yell it out. If you don't
I want to know where you preach.
You can tell, can you?
Everywhere there's a mic.
Yep, he's right. Everywhere there's a mic. For me, are you serious? You want to know? Oh, well, I let me say this. I attend Tucker Baptist Church here with Gary Hathaway, but I am a preacher everywhere I go. I sing jazz. I could be singing, some Nancy Wilson, and I'll break out and say, "Come here, baby. Come here. I'm serious. Yeah, come on." Yeah. I said, "How you doing today?"
I'm good. How are
Hey,
you?
and I might sing to her. You know what I'm doing? I'm singing healing over her. Right? Some people just need to be touched. Is that okay?
It's
Ooh,
essential.
y'all,
Yeah.
you smell good.
Thank you.
Smells good. But I do that because really who we are, you take all of that with you, right? And it does come out because like I said, I'm a genuine lover of people. And I'm sorry, I done touched all over you. I didn't even ask your name, Alex.
Yes, ma'am.
You got anything to say, Alex?
Honestly, I do feel you when you say that you have to be your authentic self everywhere you go, because it's important. I mean, changing everywhere you go, it's not who you are.
Mm-mm. And it takes a whole bunch of energy to do that.
That's right.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions? I mean, I got 1,000 of them. Any questions? Like, where do you go ahead?
So many mics to choose from.
Yeah.
My name's Anna Ferris. I want to know what you would advise in circles where you want to be your authentic self, and also want to still take wisdom from other people when they have constructive criticism or advice or lessons. How do you differentiate between this person wants me just to be someone else, or this person
Gotcha.
has a helpful word for me?
Yeah. That's a great question.
That's a really good question. So many of us, by nature of survival, have become social chameleons. We take on the background of whatever room we're in. We know how to show up in certain places. And sometimes that feels a little fake, right? Instead of setting those boundaries and saying, this is actually who I am, regardless of the background, that's an advanced skill that most people don't get until much later on in life, if they ever get there. So here's 2 things that I think you can do, okay? And then she's gonna give you the real answer. Okay, I'm gonna give you the clinical answer here. So first of all, in order to be authentic to you, you have to know you. And that is deep work. And while I'm a clinician, and I'm not saying you need to go to therapy for this, I will say sometimes the simple things that you can do, therapy's good.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody should go to therapy. Don't go to therapy just when you're sick. Thank you. Yeah. All that. But I mean, taking those moments of reflection and being able to literally sit with yourself, get rid of all the distractions,
Yep.
and just be present and listen to that voice. That is a skill that most people do not have. But when you can sit with that and you can actually think about who you are, that's one way to best show up in other places. Second thing, there's always something to learn. You've probably learned something from Karen today, okay? When you are able to be in a room and you know who you are, but yet you see something that you think maybe you want to add to your life, it doesn't change that fact of who you are. Mm-mm. What it does, I like to think of, I had a mentor one time, this is a horrible metaphor, please don't hate me for this, but he talked about Jell-O a lot. And I don't know if he'd loved Jell-O growing up too much or what, but he talked about how, when you put Jell-O in the fridge, it's all shaking around. You can add fruit up until a certain point, but then it actually gets hard. It congeals. And then the Jell-O is no longer, you can't add anything to it. I think about life as being like, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud publicly. This is one of those things like, I'm gonna go home, Miller, you should have kept that in your head. But I mean, life is like, well, what other things can I add to my Jell-O? Take this mic, but it's where people will be able to add those things that still, they don't change the flavor. They just only add to it. Oh my God. I'm done.
Oh my God, I will never look at Jell-O the same.
There's no coming back from that.
Actually, I agree with Ben. And I didn't mean to sound, and if I came off like this, let me apologize. I didn't mean to sound so rigid, right? But he's talking about that deep work. I had to do that deep work because very early on, I believe it or not, I wouldn't talk in front of people. I knew I was smart. I knew I was, I was talented. I knew I had all this stuff. I just didn't trust who I was, right? I didn't trust it. I didn't trust it or feel safe enough to release it in the world, right? Because what Ben was talking about, that deep work, I never sat with myself just to hear myself. I told you in my story very early on, I was told who I was going to be.
That's right.
There was no wiggle room for me. I was told. And while some of those things are still good, right, and I still walk and practice in those things, I'm looking in the room right now, and there are some things I want to take and glean from you all. You know what I mean? And so I didn't mean to come out saying, yes, be an open learner, be able to learn from people. But I will tell you this: when somebody is trying to speak something in you, and you hear that little still small voice that said, don't take that. You know what I mean? Y'all ever get that little gut feeling when somebody is kind of in your presence and they say something? And it just strikes you a little funny. I don't know what the clinical word is for that, but you're going to help me later. Yeah. But it's what? It's a Jell-O. Okay. When they trying to put a cherry in your Jell-O, but all you want are grapes. Did I do that right?
That's
okay.
Good.
They're trying to put a cherry in your Jell-O, but all you want are grapes, right? You got to tell them, I don't want that cherry. Don't absorb it. Because if you do, you know how much energy it's going to take for you to rid yourself of what that is?
Yeah.
Because it's easily planted when you don't know who you are. That's what I'm saying. That's right. So yeah, I'm a lifelong learner. And when I meet people, there might be things that I want to glean as well.
Ben and Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.